It was a very politicized time. Not just South Africa, but you had Korea. There was a whole democracy movement happening. 1992, LA civil unrest, 1994, Contract of America. And there was just a whole backlash against immigrants. We knew there were a lot of progressive Korean American voices in the community, but a lot of the times, because they don't speak English, they don't get heard. I was part of a large group of organizations that formed NACASEC, which is the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium. And then in '96, immigrants lost SSI and food stamps. We realized we need to have a political voice. We got 26,000 letters from Koreans all over the country. We got 100 from Alaska. We had, boxes of them. We drove it to DC. And then out of the blue, Donna Shalala, who was at the time HHS secretary, called us and said, "Hey, I heard about your letters, and I'm gonna make sure we do something." And it was like, wow. The AAPI Civic Engagement Fund was founded with the mission to boost the capacity of local API groups around the country. In 2012, we supported a poll looking at Asian American voter turnout. And what we saw from the polling is that Asian Americans broke for Obama. It sort of changed the perception of Asian Americans as either apathetic or conservative. For ourselves, that project was the beginning of funder interest in the API electorate. One of the first realizations is that while there are a lot of API groups around the country, when you have constituencies that have been historically underfunded, you have to provide general operating. You also have to support programs that allow them to do year-round civic engagement. It can't be seasonal, can't be episodic, funding shouldn't be chaotic, and it can't be small. We don't know when a tragedy will occur, and we don't know when a crisis will happen. But if you don't have the organization on the ground at the time, imagine how much harder and difficult it would have been communities without an organization like CAA. Because CAA actually had a digital engagement program, in 2020, they actually heard about the virus far more early than many others, and they became worried about how the president at the time was characterizing it. They created the Stop API Hate tracking site specifically for that. You need an organization like CAA to ensure that response is created when needed. Funding alone doesn't allow you to be effective. There were community leaders that actually started these organizations, and there's such a wisdom and body of knowledge within the API community broadly. Being a funder, we have access to so much information. We know more about each of the groups that they don't know about each other. So if we can help convene, if we can create spaces for that, I think that that's one of the most effective ways of being a funder. It's partly why we help support the Shared Liberation Network, which CAA is actually one of the network waivers for. We saw, especially in 2020, if we remember that time, it was a time of isolation. It was a time when even organizations didn't know how they were going to pivot. We recognized that if we could help facilitate the organizations coming together, that was critical. The Shared Liberation Network is a grantee-led space. We facilitate it by providing resources so that they can meet, but the agenda is set by them. What's important more than anything is just the idea that if you invest long-term, substantively to local API groups, that is probably the most effective way to really build a national API movement. Honestly, if you know how to run a small organization of $500,000 with one staff, you can run a city council or a city. So what can we do to build that pipeline and see what happens when you allow community leaders and organizations to serve and empower the communities as they know how to do?